Chapter 1, Prologue. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. 0v0 //// Muggle-Raised Champion. Saturday, 31 August 1991. 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. Harry Potter's face split into the widest of grins as he plucked the pencil stub off of his desk. Then, with his eyes sparkling in anticipation, he ticked off the second to last little square on the calendar that he'd made and pinned to his wall. Just one more day, he thought. One more and I'll be leaving the Dursleys. Harry's world had changed dramatically almost exactly 1 month ago on his 11th birthday. Although, come to think of it, it had really started some days before that. That was when those mysterious envelopes addressed to him in green ink had started to arrive. At first, it had only been the one lying on the doorstep with the other mail, and Harry, in his befuddled ignorance, had taken it to the breakfast table where he tried to open it in front of his aunt, uncle, and cousin. A single look was all that it seemed to take for his Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon to put a stop to that. Harry hadn't realized it at the time, but that one little letter had seriously scared his relatives. That letter had been burned unopened, without the chance for Harry to know who had written him his very first ever letter. And then had begun the battle of the letters. Every day after that, more and more letters began appearing. First one, then 3, then 12 letters had arrived for Harry over the next few days, all addressed to Harry, and each time mentioning his exact room, firstly the cupboard under the stairs, and then the smallest bedroom. Not even Uncle Vernon, nailing the post flap shut, had stopped them being delivered. On Saturday, 2 dozen were delivered inside of eggs that Aunt Petunia tried to cook for breakfast. Even then, Harry had known that it had to have been done with magic, no matter how much Uncle Vernon had vehemently denied its existence. 30 or 40 letters had come shooting out of the fireplace on Sunday, the day that there was supposed to be no post at all. Thatcher had started a chain reaction in Uncle Vernon that included a mad drive across the country and the family sleeping in the crudest of huts in the middle of the sea in the fiercest of storms. And at midnight, exactly when Harry turned 11, he finally received his letter. It had been hand-delivered by the biggest man that Harry had ever seen. Hagrid, for that was the giant of a man's name, had appeared at first, and even second sight, to be incredibly scary, especially after he'd knocked the door flat to get into the hut, boomed his big voice at his relatives, plucked the shotgun out of Uncle Vernon's hand, and tied it into a knot, and finished with giving his cousin Dudley a pig's tail by magic. After spending the day with Hagrid exploring the magical shops in Diagon Alley, Harry now knew that Hagrid really was a kind, gentle man. And how could he not think that after Hagrid had given him his first ever birthday cake and bought him his first ever gift, his best friend and owl, Hedwig, Hagrid had also introduced him to the world that his parents came from, the wizarding world. And now Harry knew that he himself was just like them. He, too, was a wizard. That was why freakish things always seemed to happen to him and around him. And to learn it all, Harry had to attend a magic school, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, in fact. That thought brought him back to the scrap of paper that he'd turned into a calendar that he had pinned to his wall, counting down the days, until he could leave the Dursleys, if not for good, at least for the next 10 months. Plucking the train ticket that Hagrid had given him up from its place of honor at the top of his desk, Harry reread the details for what must have been the 10,000th time. He was to leave from King's Cross Station, platform 9 3/4, at 11 o'clock on Sunday, September 1st. Harry's eyes darted to the trunk sitting at the end of his bed. It was already completely packed. Clothes, books, ink bottles and quills, cauldron and potion ingredients, even the little brass telescope. The only thing left sitting on top of it were the clothes that he'd wear tomorrow on this momentous journey. With a last look at his ticket, Harry stuffed it into his pocket and went in search of his Uncle Vernon. If tomorrow was the day, then Harry figured that he'd better make sure that he could get to King's Cross Station. It simply wouldn't do to miss the train. Creeping down the stairs, Harry nervously stuck his head into the living room where he could hear the blaring of the television. Sure enough, all three of his relatives were in there watching some quiz show. Taking one last swallow to gather his courage, Harry stepped into the room and nervously cleared his throat to announce his presence. The second that the sound emerged, his cousin Dudley's head snapped around, his small, piggish eyes widened in fear, and he bolted from the couch and room as fast as he could, both hands wrapped tightly to this fat bottom and his curly pig's tail. Ignoring his cousin's now predictable behavior for any time that he entered a room, Harry turned to face his uncle. Uncle Vernon," he asked. A grunt from the enormous man, seated in his favorite armchair, showed that he was at least listening. I need to be at King's Cross tomorrow to go to Hogwarts." Once again, Uncle Vernon grunted, encouraging Harry to continue. "Would it be all right if you gave me a lift?" he asked. At this, Uncle Vernon reached over to the remote and turned off the television before turning to face him. Harry took a half-step back at the expression of his uncle's face. There was a look of demented glee shining from his eyes, and the ends of his bushy, walrus-like mustache were curled up with his smile. No, I don't think so," Uncle Vernon stated simply. "We've got other plans, you see." "What?" Harry blinked in shock. "Yes," Uncle Vernon continued in a voice so absolutely calm that it made Harry's skin crawl. "Tomorrow, we have an appointment at the hospital to get that ruddy tail removed that giant freak of an oaf gave Dudley." But how will I get to King's Cross then?" Harry asked. "Oh, that's easy," Uncle Vernon replied as his face morphed into a vicious scowl. "You see, you're not. You don't need to go to King's Cross because you're not going to that freak school." But you told Hagrid," Harry began. "I did no such thing," Uncle Vernon bellowed suddenly, leaning forward in his chair. "I did no such thing, and no freak, no matter how big he is going to tell me you had to do. No, boy, you'll be going to Stonewall High, just like we planned," Aunt Petunia stated with a single nod of her horsey head as she weighed into the discussion. But Harry tried again, unsure exactly what he was going to say. "No buts, boy," Uncle Vernon growled. "Those ruddy freaks left you on our doorstep, burdened us with your care for 10 years already. We've given you good clothes, a place to sleep, good food, and even a ruddy pair of glasses." Harry's mouth opened and closed at this, but no sound came out. Dudley's old cast-offs were good clothes. He guessed that technically the cupboard under the stairs counted as a place to sleep, and as for food, well, he did eat good food. After all, he'd cooked it all. It was simply the fact that it consisted of whatever leftover scraps that he could manage to scrounge that he had an issue with. "No, boy," Uncle Vernon continued. "Your Aunt Petunia and I are your guardians, and we're the ones who get to say what you'll be doing. And we say that you won't going to any freak school. You'll go a good, decent, normal school. Yes. Stonewall High's where you'll going. Some place where there's no freakishness, for you get even more corrupted than your good-for-nothing parents already made you." "But they'll be expecting me," Harry managed to whisper. "You're right there, boy," Uncle Vernon stated, before twisting his enormous body to pluck up an envelope that was resting beside his mug of tea. "But we've already thought of that. We've written those freaks a letter. You can get that ruddy owl to take it to them. That is how freaks like to have their mail delivered, isn't it?" All Harry could do was nod his head. The rest of him, his thoughts included, had frozen at what his uncle had just told him. "Perhaps you should read it to him, Vernon, to make sure that he believes us," Aunt Petunia suggested. "Good idea, pet, good idea," Uncle Vernon replied, eyes gleaming in obvious anticipation. Thick, pudgy fingers fished out a clean, crisp piece of paper before snapping it open. "To whom it may concern," Uncle Vernon read. "We, the undersigned, as legal guardians for our nephew, Harry James Potter, declare that he shall not attending your school. Do not attempt to contact us in any way, for we shall not be changing our decision, and any attempt to do so will result in legal action being taken. Signed Vernon Dudley Dursley and Petunia Rose Dursley, August 31, 1991. P.S. Do not send the bird back. Doing so will only result in it having its neck wrung. A shocked gasp escaped Harry, and it was only by putting one hand out to grasp the doorframe that stopped him from crashing to the ground on his suddenly unsteady legs. So, you see, boy, Uncle Vernon continued, his eyes dancing with glee, we've taken care of that for you. No freak school for you. No more bloody owl messing up my house and waking us up at God-forsaken hours of the night, and no more freakishness. Harry peeled his eyes off of the man and looked to his aunt, but if he expected any help from that quarter, he was sadly mistaken. His Aunt Petunia's long neck was on display as she held her head high, looking down her nose at him from where she sat. Now, I want you to go and get all of your freakish stuff and bring it down here. I'll take it to the incinerator after we get back from the hospital tomorrow, Uncle Vernon told him. For now, you can put it in your old bedroom. When you're in there, you'll find a stack of Dudley's old-school exercise books and things. We've even been kind enough to rip out the pages that Dudley'd already used. Take it all back to your room. You'll need them for when you go to Stonewall tomorrow. Yes, Uncle Vernon, Harry answered automatically, his brain still not completely processing just how fast his world was crashing around him. And once Dudley goes off to Smeltings next week after he heals up, it'll just be the three of us in the house, Uncle Vernon continued, and I'll not have you getting in your aunt's way. So, things are going to change a bit. Harry's eyes darted between the two adults as a cold shiver of dread rushed down his spine. You'll still have all your normal chores, of course, Uncle Vernon instructed, but on top of that, I've found you a job. A job? Harry asked. That's right. A fine, respectable job that'll help you earn your keep, Uncle Vernon beamed. What sort of job? Harry managed to ask. You'll be working at Keating's Wood End Furniture. I've already arranged it with Mr. Keating. He's an old friend of mine, more than willing to have a fit, young lad like you around to help out. It'll mostly be cleaning and sweeping and keeping the place tidy and whatever else Terry can come up with. You'll be there from 7 in the morning until 7 at night, every Saturday and Sunday, and then every day, every school holiday. That'll give you plenty of time to still cook our breakfast and dinner and do all of your normal chores every night. But what about homework? Harry gasped, trying to wrap his mind around this new situation. That's your lookout, isn't it? Uncle Vernon grinned. Oh, and don't worry about needing to collect your wages. Terry and I've come to a nice little arrangement. He'll be giving me whatever you earn directly. I should think that simply getting the opportunity to learn some real skills so that you don't turn out like your freak parents will be payment enough for you. Harry's mouth opened and closed. A job. He'd been given a job. Any chance of having any free time had simply evaporated. He'd always liked the chance to get out of the house on the weekends, even if it did mostly end up meaning that he had to run from Dudley and his gang. At least it had been a chance to relax and get away from his chores. Now, even that simple pleasure had been taken from him. Well, what are you waiting for? Uncle Vernon asked, his eyes narrowing, an engraved invitation. Get upstairs and bring down that freakishness, and make sure that you get off it, books, clothes, cauldron, and especially that ruddy stick. At the first sign of a twitch from his uncle's hand, Harry scampered. Entering his room, Harry skidded across the floor before falling to his knees in front of his new trunk. Twin trembling hands gently caressed the smooth wood before he closed his eyes and threw open the lid, sending his old Dudley hand-me-downs that he'd planned on wearing tomorrow sliding to the floor. Taking a deep breath, he opened his eyes and stared inside the trunk, his breath hitched at what he was about to give up. All of the dreams that he'd had the past month were about to go up in flames, sitting in classes learning how to do magic, how to make things float and change, how to protect himself, and all of the wondrous potions that he would have learnt to brew. His hands ran over the spines of the books that he'd already read through, sometimes more than once. There was the thicker history of magic, the book that he'd found Hedwig's name in. There was the standard book of spells that excited him so much, and there was magical drafts and potions that he'd found so interesting. Quickly dashing his sleeve under his nose, Harry briefly touched the telescope and cauldron before his hand closed around his wand. He remembered the strange man, Mr. Ollivander, telling him that it was Harley and Phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. He gave it a single determined wave, eliciting red and gold sparks out of the end of it and creating a small smile on his face before he gently placed it back. For a fraction of a second, Harry considered hiding the wand, but even before the thought had fully formed, he knew that it was pointless. Uncle Vernon would be sure to check to make sure that it was in the trunk before he had it all destroyed. But there was one thing that Harry knew that his aunt and uncle knew nothing about, something that was small enough to hide and important enough to risk any sort of wrath. Digging into his trunk, Harry's fist closed around the small metallic object before he quickly scuttled to the loose floorboard that he discovered under his bed. Lifting it up, Harry dropped the tiny golden key into the hidey hole. At least his key to his vault was safe, even if he wouldn't be able to use it again for 7 years or so. "Hurry up, boy," Uncle Vernon bellowed up the stairs. "Coming, Uncle Vernon," Harry called back, before slamming the lip of the trunk closed and grabbing the handle. He heaved the heavy trunk down the stairs, causing both his aunt and uncle to scowl at him as it thanked each step. Then, after opening the door to his old room, he wiggled the trunk backwards and forwards until it was all the way in the tiny cupboard under the stairs. There, as promised, he found the stack of old exercise books along with a tatty pencil case that he assumed was filled with half-chewed and broken pencils sitting on top of an old faded brown knapsack. "Bring that owl down here," Uncle Vernon instructed, "and then we can get that letter sent off to the freaks." "Yes, Uncle Vernon," Harry replied, picking up the pile that he'd been eyeing with disgust. Harry found Hedwig exactly where he'd left her, sitting on the perch in her cage, her head tucked under one wing as she slept. "Hedwig," Harry said sadly. In response, the beautiful snowy white owl ruffled her feathers and swiveled her head to look at him. "Come on, girl. Uncle Vernon's got a letter for you to deliver," he said. "Immediately," Hedwig preened. "And I'm sorry, girl, but you can't come back afterwards," Harry told her. "Uncle Vernon said that he'd kill you if you did. Perhaps you could stay with Hagrid. He was nice, and he did buy you after all." Hedwig stretched forward and nibbled on Harry's fingers. Knowing that it was useless to delay, Harry lifted his best friend out of her cage and carried her downstairs. As soon as he arrived in the living room, the letter was thrust into his chest. Taking it, Harry attached it to Hedwig's leg with shaking fingers. Fighting back tears, Harry took his owl across to the open window and bent down so that she could hop from his shoulder to the windowsill. "You need to take the letter to Hogwarts. Goodbye, Hedwig," he whispered brokenly. Then, with a last nip of his fingers, Hedwig spread her wings and soared away through the window, taking all of the wondrous thoughts and feelings, hopes and dreams that Harry'd had for the past month with her. Chapter 2. No More Freakishness. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Muggle-Raised Champion. Chapter 1. No More Freakishness. Monday, 31 October 1994. 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. A tired, sweaty Harry Potter trudged through the rear door at number 4 Privet Drive later than usual. Almost without thinking, his feet took him into the little laundry where he reached up and pulled down a pair of pants and a shirt from on top of the cupboard. Having placed them on the tiny bench, Harry began shucking off the overalls and undershirt that he was wearing before throwing them straight into the washing machine. He'd learnt very early on that traipsing through the house and up to his room after work was a very bad idea. Aunt Petunia nearly had a fit the first time that he'd left a trail of sawdust from one end of the house to the other. In fact, that was one of the very few times that Harry had actually been hit by his aunt. His Uncle Vernon, though, had had no such restraints, and had shown his displeasure with Harry, thinking that it was all right to come home and have a shower and get changed before making his dinner. And after over 3 years, Harry now had the routine down pat. Come home and straight to the laundry to change into the clothes that he'd left there, followed by scrubbing his arms and face in the basin before shaking out his hair from any loose detritus from the day's work, and then finally re-entering the kitchen. After that, there was dinner to make and the cleaning up to do, not to mention any chores that he'd been assigned for the day. Only then could he finally have a shower, and if he was still awake enough, attempt to do some homework ready for school the next day. Of course, that was his routine now. The first couple of years that he'd worked at Keating's Wood End Furniture, he'd only worked weekends and holidays. But for the last year and a bit, he'd added working every afternoon after school as well. All that extra work was murder on his school results, though. He figured that that was why Uncle Vernon had renegotiated with Terry for the extra hours. All through primary school, Harry'd known that coming home with better grades than Dudley was a very bad idea. If Dudley hadn't beaten him up for it, then Uncle Vernon made sure that he knew the inadvisability of that idea with a few well-placed slaps. And then there were the numerous times that both his cousin and uncle got in on the act. Then had come high school, where Harry and Dudley had finally been separated, Harry to Stonewall High and Dudley to Smeltings. With the two cousins at separate schools, and especially with Dudley being away at boarding school, Harry had allowed his natural academic prowess to slip through. By no means was he anywhere near the top of the class, but he was definitely in the upper reaches. And then Dudley had brought home his report card from Smeltings at the end of their first year of high school, and Harry had been forced to understand just how badly he had slipped up. Every day that holiday he'd thanked his lucky stars that he was out working from dawn until dusk every day. The second year, Harry tried to curb his ability, but it was hard, especially when his teachers already had an idea of the level to which he could perform. He'd even attempted to immerse himself in subjects that he knew Dudley wouldn't even consider taking: woodworking and art, and even home economics. Not that it did much good. His marks were still light years above Dudley's. Thus, Uncle Vernon's solution of having Harry increase his hours at Keatingstow, the point that if he wasn't at school, then he was at work, and if he wasn't there, then he was at home doing chores. Somewhere in there, he managed to find the time to do his homework, although, admittedly, most of that time was at lunchtime at school. Stretching a kink out of his back, Harry sighed with relief. A quick glance at the clock told him that he was fast running out of time. Pots and pans were quickly retrieved, followed by potatoes, beans, carrots, and a massive hunk of prime beef from the fridge. As the small part of Harry's brain settled into the mundane of cooking dinner for his relatives, the bulk of his mind was still processing his day. October 31 had never been a day that he particularly liked, and especially after he'd found out that that was the day that his parents had been killed. But today had been different. It had actually been good. It had started at school in art class where, at the end of the lesson, he, along with two of his classmates, had been held back by their art teacher, Mrs. Jensen. The kindly old teacher had informed the three of them that there was an art competition being held the following month at the Surrey Art Gallery for high school students, and that she thought that they all had the talent necessary to enter. As thrilled as Harry was about the opportunity, he didn't seriously consider that he'd enter, after all. The consent form buried at the bottom of his bag needed his guardian's signature, something that he knew wouldn't be given. The other part of Harry's day that still held his attention had happened at Keating's Wood End Furniture. Today, both Terry and Pete, his boss and the store's lead furniture maker, had signed off on his most elaborate piece of furniture yet. Over the last couple of years, Terry, Pete, Sid, and old Angus had been teaching him how to use the various tools of a woodworker, and had helped him learn how to select, shape, and then piece together pieces of furniture. Already he'd created a full dining set, table, and 4 chairs in a very basic design: a single bed, a pair of bedside tables, a hat stand, and a blanket box. But for the last 4 months, he'd been working on a desk. And not just any desk, but the best designed and constructed desk that Harry could imagine. It was 5 feet long, with a set of 4 drawers on either side the leg cavity. Its top was protected by a sleek black roller top that stretched down from the top of the hutch at the front of the desk. Inside this hutch were a dozen drawers of varying sizes, along with another dozen open pigeonholes. A large black blotter set off the desktop from the rich red rowan wood that he'd created the entire desk from. Terry declared it the best piece that he'd seen in many a long year. Harry was incredibly proud of what he'd been able to create. Seeing it sitting there in front of his workbench with Terry and Pete standing back, nodding at him, hints of the smiles that they were trying to hide peeking through their identical black beards had warmed Harry's heart. He wasn't looking forward to actually passing it along to Felicity, Terry's wife, and the one in charge of the showroom ready for sale, especially knowing that, once it's sold, he wouldn't actually see any of the profits from it. No, his share would go straight to Uncle Vernon. "Dinner should be ready by now, boy." Uncle Vernon's accusation broke into Harry's musing. "Yes, Uncle Vernon," Harry replied automatically. "I'm just about to dish up." With umph annoyance, Uncle Vernon turned and waddled from the room. Dinner, as per normal for the Dursley household, was a quiet affair. There was a smattering of conversation between the adults while Harry was duly ignored. The instant that Harry had finished his meager plate, he scurried about the kitchen, attempting to get everything cleaned up as quickly as possible. The sound of the doorbell froze the three of them, Vernon and Petunia still at the table, and Harry with suds up to his elbows. "Who in the devil would be calling at this time of night?" Uncle Vernon growled. Harry had only taken a single step towards the door before a meaty hand clasped onto his shoulder. "You clean, I'll get the door." Harry's ears were quivering as he attempted to listen in on their unexpected visitor, but all that he could hear from the other end of the house was the occasional muted voice. If he had to guess, though, he would have said that there were 2 visitors at the door. The thumping footsteps of his uncle returning were accompanied by others, prompting Harry to turn as Uncle Vernon and 2 other men entered the kitchen. The first was a tall, thin, elderly gentleman. His short steel-gray hair was parted in an unnaturally straight line, and his thin mustache was ruler straight. He was dressed in an impeccably crisp dark suit and tie, set off by highly polished shoes. While the first looked as though he was some kind of bank manager, the other gave the impression of a dark worker or rugby player gone to seed. His upper body and arms still sported large muscles, but gone somewhat flabby, and were accompanied by a paunch that rivaled Uncle Vernon's. He had a jolly-looking face, and gave the impression that he knew far more dirty jokes than he could ever tell in one sitting. His clothes, though, were off somehow, as though he'd dressed in the dark or something. He wore an old faded jersey in garish horizontal black and yellow stripes with a cartoonish wasp emblazoned on the front. His suit pants were tucked into knee-high boots of some dark green leather that Harry'd never seen before. "Boy, these 2 men are here from the government to talk to you about some competition that you've entered," Uncle Vernon glared. Harry started, whirling around so that soap suds flicked onto the kitchen floor. "But Mrs. Jensen only gave me the form about it today, and I wasn't going to enter, I swear." "Who's Mrs. Jensen?" Aunt Petunia asked sweetly, an act that Harry knew was for their visitors. "My art teacher," Harry replied. "No, no, we're not here about an art competition," the tall, thin man stated. He faced Harry fully then and stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Mr. Potter, it is an honor to finally meet you." Snatching up a dish towel, Harry wiped his hands before gingerly taking the proffered hand. "Ah, thanks." Oh, of course, we haven't introduced ourselves, have we? Very remiss of us. The thin man gave a thin-lipped smile. My name is Bartemius Crouch, and this is my colleague Ludo Bagman, and we aren't here about an art competition. Nice to meet you, Harry, Ludo Bagman said jollily, pumping Harry's arm. Uncle Vernon's eyes narrowed. Exactly what department in the government are you from? Mr. Crouch turned so that he was facing the larger man. I am the head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. Out, Uncle Vernon roared. I'll not have you freaks in my house pretending to be from the government. But we are from the government, Mr. Crouch protested. We're from the Ministry of Magic. That was enough for Uncle Vernon to start getting physical. Two meaty paws slammed into the front of the tall, thin man, pushing him back a number of quick steps. Here now, stop that, Ludo Bagman snapped. This is my house, and I'll do whatever I please in it, Uncle Vernon shot back. Now get out. But it's vitally important that we speak to you and Mr. Potter, Mr. Crouch protested. He could lose his magic if we don't. Suddenly Uncle Vernon froze, a gleam in his eye. The boy could lose his freakishness. Yes, Mr. Crouch huffed. How? Uncle Vernon asked pleasantly. We've just come from Hogwarts, Ludo Bagman replied. You know what Hogwarts is, don't you? A short, sharp nod of a head indicated that they all knew. Well, the three largest magical schools in Europe have gathered there, and they're holding a competition, the TriWizard Tournament. That's why I'm involved. I'm the head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, Ludo Bagman stated. What's that got to do with the boy losing his thingy? Uncle Vernon near growled. Most likely. Harry thought at so many uses of the hated M word in his house. Yes, well, Mr. Crouch continued. Each school is to be represented by a single champion in the tournament, and tonight was the choosing ceremony. However, the Goblet of Fire, the magical artifact that chooses the champions, for some reason that we can't explain at the moment, chose for champions this evening. 4 pairs of eyes swiveled to the dark-haired boy leaning up against the kitchen sink, soap suds still sitting just below his elbows. What, me? It was chosen? Harry asked incredulously. Right in one, Harry, my boy, Ludo replied, smiling widely enough to nearly split his face in two. You said something about the boy losing his freakishness, Uncle Vernon prompted. Yes, of course, Mr. Crouch nodded with a frown. When Mr. Potter's name emerged from the Goblet of Fire, it created a magical contract between him and the goblet in relation to the TriWizard Champion. How is that possible? Harry asked. I didn't put my name in the first place. Ludo Bagman shrugged a large shoulder. No one quite understands that, but rules are rules, right, Barty? Indeed, they are, Mr. Crouch replied. You still haven't explained how the boy gets to lose it, Uncle Vernon persisted, more than a touch of annoyance in his voice. The fact that a magical contract has been enacted between Mr. Potter and the Goblet of Fire means that Mr. Potter is now a TriWizard Champion. Being a TriWizard Champion means that he must compete in each of the 3 tasks that make up the tournament, or he will forfeit his magic, Mr. Crouch explained. So, you see, young Harry here has to come with us back to Hogwarts, Ludo finished gleefully. No, Uncle Vernon stated emphatically. No, Mr. Crouch repeated, blinking rapidly in obvious startlement. No, Uncle Vernon repeated. We've been trying to stamp out the boy's freakishness for years. We even managed to put a stop to him going off to that freak school when those damn letters came 3 years ago. And if this tournament thingy is going to get rid of his freakishness for good, then there's no way that either his aunt or I are going to let the boy compete. You can't be serious, Mr. Crouch replied, sharing a glance with his slack-jawed companion. You want Mr. Potter to lose his magic. Too right we do, Uncle Vernon stated, his eyes gleaming in anticipation. But he's Harry Potter, the boy who lived, Ludo Bagman stated, pointing at Harry. What? Harry asked as a vague memory of a large man, A dingy pub and crowds of people burst from his memory. "The boy who what?" Uncle Vernon spluttered. "The boy who lived," Ludo Bagman repeated. "Harry's a very important figure in the magical world." "Mr. Potter must compete," Mr. Crouch stated. "I don't care if he's the Queen of England," Uncle Vernon snapped back. "The fact is that his aunt and I are his guardians, and we get to say what the boy can and can't do. And we say that he's going nowhere near that abnormal competition or that freakish school of yours. And if that means that he'll finally lose his freakishness for good, well, that's just a bonus, isn't it?" But Ludo began to protest before he was cut off by Uncle Vernon. "Now, if that's all that you had to say, I'll ask you to leave." After sharing a glance with each other, Mr. Crouch gave Harry a nod before the two men turned and headed back the way that they'd come. Harry was still standing facing the kitchen door, his thoughts frozen and whirling with everything that he'd just heard at the same time when his uncle re-entered the room. "Don't just stand there, boy. Get your chores done," Uncle Vernon growled. "Yes, Uncle Vernon," Harry replied automatically before turning back to the sink and the dirty plates awaiting him. Chapter 3. Welcome to Adulthood. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Tuesday, 1 November 1994. Office of the Minister for Magic, London. "Barty, I didn't expect to see you here this morning," an exuberant Minister for Magic, declared as his head of department for international magical cooperation, appeared in his doorway. "Good morning, Minister," Bartemius replied. "I must admit that I did not expect to be here either." "We had a bit of problem with young Harry," Ludo Bagman clarified as he entered the office behind his colleague. "How are you this morning, Cornelius?" "I'm fine, fine," Minister Fudge replied, indicating the seats in front of his desk for the two men. "A bit of a problem, you say?" "Indeed, Minister," Bartemius replied. "It was just as Dumbledore predicted." "Those relatives of young Harry's are really something, let me tell you," Ludo agreed. "Especially that uncle of his." "Did you get to speak to the boy at all?" Cornelius asked, leaning forward on his desk. "A brief greeting," Bartemius replied. Otherwise, the uncle dominated the conversation. "And I take it Harry's uncle isn't inclined to allow the boy to compete?" Cornelius asked. Ludo shook his head. Not in the slightest. Seemed to find the whole idea that young Harry could lose his magic as something to get excited about. "And you couldn't convince him otherwise, I take it?" Cornelius asked hopefully. "No, Minister," Bartemius replied flatly. "Once he had ordered us from his home, there was nothing that we could do. I do know the law, after all." "Yes, yes, quite so," Cornelius allowed. "Very disappointing. But if we allow young Mr. Potter to lose his magic, the public will crucify us. Did you get much reaction from Harry at all? What's he like?" "The boy was doing dishes like a common house elf, Cornelius," Ludo declared indignantly. "He hardly said a word, either, and judging by the looks his uncle was giving him, I suspect that speaking out of turn is probably highly discouraged in that household. Wouldn't surprise me if it was violently so." "Now we can't have that," Cornelius stated emphatically. "The boy who lived treated like a house elf. Is there nothing that we can do to get the boy out of that situation?" "Mr. Potter is with his legal guardians," Bartemius stated. "They have complete control and say over his life." "Barty's right, Minister," Ludo agreed. "While young Harry's still underage, his aunt and uncle won't let him have anything to do with the magical world. Not that it'll matter in 3 weeks' time. Once he fails to show up and compete in the TriWizard, the Goblet'll strip him of his magic." Cornelius tapped his fingers on his desk, thinking hard about what his two department heads were telling him. "Sirius Black's the boy's godfather, isn't he?" he mused. "Could we get Harry's guardianship transferred to him?" "Not within the required framework. That'll keep the boy from losing his magic," Bartemius replied. Why not? Cornelius snapped. After that debacle with Black earlier this year, the public would lap up him getting to be Harry's guardian. True, Minister. However, you're forgetting that as part of our reparations to Mr. Black, we agreed to pay for his rehabilitation in St. Mungo's. My understanding is that the healers want him to have a minimum of 6 months treatment for his mental and physical conditions before they'll allow him to rejoin society. And it's only been 4 months, Bermia stated. Once again, Cornelius drummed his fingers on his desktop. The boy has no other relatives, he asked. None close enough. I wonder, Cornelius murmured, as a mad idea occurred. If Harry Potter was given the choice of whether or not to compete in the tournament, do you think that he would do it? Cornelius asked slowly. I mean, if the choice was completely up to him. Ludo looked at his colleague before shrugging. Possibly. We weren't able to get much of a read on the boy when we were there, as we said. He definitely seemed interested in what we were saying, though. With a decisive nod of his head, Cornelius looked towards his office door. Carleen, can you get Madam Bones in here ASAP? As the sound of retreating footsteps could be heard, Ludo questioned the minister. What do you want Amelia for? I can't see how arresting Harry's aunt and uncle is going to help. I don't want to arrest them, Cornelius said, shaking his head. I just had an idea of how we can get Harry to make the decision for himself, and if what you've told me is correct, then it might just give us a bit of an edge with the boy at the same time. Smiling happily to himself at his cleverness, Cornelius sat back in his chair and waited for his head of magical law enforcement to appear. Thankfully, he didn't have long to wait. You wanted to see me, Cornelius? Amelia Bones asked. Cornelius smiled up at the imposing witch standing in his doorway. She was one of the most serious witches that he knew, and her appearance, with her square jaw and close-cropped grey hair, only emphasized it. The monocle that she had attached to her right eye always gave him the appearance that she could see more than she ever let on, leaving him permanently nervous in her presence. But for all that, she was one of the best department heads that he had at his service. Come in, Amelia, he invited, waving her towards the last unoccupied seat in front of his desk. After giving the 3 department heads the chance to greet each other, Cornelius got down to business. Now, Amelia, I assume that you know about the TriWizard tournament. Of course, she replied. And have you heard about the little hiccup that occurred at the choosing ceremony last night? He asked. Amelia spared a glance at the 2 men beside her, her lips narrowed in displeasure. No, I haven't heard anything about that. Well, it seems that the Goblet of Fire, for some reason, spat out 4 names instead of 3, Cornelius told her. I'll begin an investigation into that immediately, Amelia declared, conjuring a quill and parchment to begin taking notes. Who was named as the 4th champion? Harry Potter. Amelia's eyes widened so much at that announcement that her monocle promptly fell out, only to get halfway to her lap before magically reversing course and returning to its former position in front of her eye. Harry Potter, she clarified. Indeed, Cornelius confirmed. We've got no idea how his name got into the goblet in the first place, but that's not our main concern right at this moment. What in Merlin's name could be more concerning than the boy who lived's name coming out of the Goblet of Fire? A vessel that he had absolutely no way of entering his name into in the first place, she asked incredulously. The fact that his guardians are failing to allow him to compete, Bartemius stated. But if he doesn't compete, that would mean that he would, Amelia stuttered at the implications. Cornelius nodded in agreement. Exactly. Harry Potter is in very real danger of losing his magic. And you say that his guardians are refusing to allow him to compete, Amelia clarified. Barty and I visited them last night, Ludo told her. They seemed quite happy at the prospect of Harry losing his magic. Amelia shook her head. It was bad enough that they didn't allow him to go to Hogwarts, but this, I take it, you have something in mind. Cornelius smiled. He knew that Amelia would be able to piece things together quickly. Between you and Barty, you know the law better than anyone, Cornelius began. Tell me, what would the implications be if we emancipated Harry Potter? Amelia, Ludo, and Bartemius shared stunned looks between them before smiles slowly began to form on two of those three faces. Bartemius Crouch, after all, hadn't smiled for any reason in nigh on a decade. Legally, he'd be declared an adult, Bartemius stated, subject to all of the laws of anyone of age. He'd have full wand rights, be eligible for an apparition license, the works. I can't see there being any issue with the goblins, Ludo put in. They'd make sure that he received access to any vaults that he was eligible for. The fact that we changed the rules of the TriWizard tournament so that only those of age were able to compete could be used as an argument to the fact that the ministry has already declared Mr. Potter as being of age, Bartemius mused. I'm not sure exactly how successful the debater would be in a court setting, but it is an interesting point. As far as my department is concerned, the only issue that I could think of is the fact that we'd have a 14-year-old able to do magic without having had any training, Amelia commented. I suspect that if we offered young Harry a way to get away from those relatives of his, we could get him to agree to the small condition of needing to at least pass a certain minimum number of owls, if not newts as well, Cornelia said. Amelia nodded her head. If Mr. Potter needs to be at Hogwarts for the tournament anyway, I don't think that that would be a problem. I doubt that Headmaster Dumbledore would have a problem with arranging a special curriculum for Mr. Potter, Bartemius hypothesized. Right then, seems like we all agree on the idea in principle, Cornelius declared, rubbing his hand together. What do we need to do to make this happen? Normally, this sort of thing is handled as a petition to the Wisengamot, Bartemius related. However, 5 department heads or 3 department heads and the Minister of Magic could complete the forms and sign off on the decision without the Wisengamot's involvement. Really? Cornelius beamed. Oh, and would you look at that? I just so happen to be the Minister for Magic, and I have 3 department heads here right now. /0v0 / Tuesday, 1 November 1994. Stonewall High, Surrey. Shoving his notebook, pens and text into his bag any old how, Harry slowly rose to his feet, groaning as he did so. Late nights plus a full school day were never a good combination. He knew that. Actually, he knew this feeling very well indeed, especially after a day when Uncle Vernon had come home slightly drunk and increased his chore list tenfold. But the previous night's lack of sleep had nothing to do with Uncle Vernon. Well, to be honest, it did in a way. As soon as Harry's head had hit his pillow, his brain went into overdrive, firstly replaying the visit by the 2 wizards after dinner, and then with the thought of what was going to happen to him. Sometime soon, he was going to lose his magic. To be honest, it wasn't that big of a deal. As the years had progressed, he'd hardly ever done any. The last truly accidental bout of magic that he'd performed was 2 summers ago when Dudley and his friends had been chasing him across the park. They'd nearly trapped him between the trees and the fence when 4 of the fence palings had suddenly disappeared, giving him an avenue of escape. That didn't mean that that was the last time that Harry had used magic. No, not in the slightest. Knowing what caused the weird, freakish things that happened around him was caused by, Harry had taken to trying to make things happen. 9 times out of 10, nothing happened at all, no matter how much he screwed up his face and wished for it to. But there were 1 or 2 things that he could do pretty consistently, like making things come to him when he wanted them, for example. That one was pretty handy, especially when he was in the workshop at Keating's. The first time the tape measure had slid across the workbench by itself had surprised him. The second time, he'd broken out into a massive grin, and after a couple of months of practicing, he could make nearly anything fly straight into his hand, as long as he was in sight of it, at least. The other thing that he'd learnt how to do at will was to create a small orb of light that hovered just above his outstretched palm. It was perfect when he needed to see, and was too lazy to simply get out of bed and turn on the light switch. He'd even learnt how to change the light different colors. And now, because of some stupid competition that he'd been entered into in conjunction with his uncle's stubbornness, he was going to lose that small part of him that still connected him to his parents, and he didn't even know when. Obviously, it had happened when he failed to turn up to the first part of the tournament, but he hadn't thought to ask when that was. It could be tomorrow, or next week, or next month, but whenever it was, he'd lose his magic forever. Glad that the school day was finally over, Harry trudged towards the front doors of Stonewall High. He still had a 3-hour shift to put in Acciatings, then his usual chores and an ancient history assignment to finish before he could finally crash. He suspected that tonight was going to be another late one. A pair of vaguely familiar figures standing just outside the school gates, one in a crisp business suit, the other wearing that same old faded yellow and black jersey, caused Harry to near stumble. Tucking his sketch pad under his arm while hitching up his backpack allowed him to scrub his tired eyes with both hands. Obviously, his tired mind had caused him to hallucinate the two wizards from last night to a place where they had absolutely no place being. Dropping his hands, his eyes widened at the fact that the two men were still there. Cautiously, he started walking again, his eyes fixed on the odd pair. It was obvious the second that they saw him. The yellow and black-shirted one, Bagman, Harry thought his name was, nudged the other and pointed him out. The thinner man, Crutch, no, he knew that wasn't right. But for the life of him, Harry couldn't remember what the man's name was, nodded, and led the way towards him. "Mr. Potter, we were wondering if we could have a word," the one who could be creature asked. "I'm sorry, I've got work in half an hour, and if I miss my bus now, there's no way that I could get there in time," Harry explained with a shake of his head. "That won't be a problem, Mr. Potter," the man replied. "We can get you there in a blink of an eye," Bagman whispered, leaning close. Harry eyed them suspiciously before deciding simply to be polite. "Look, I'd really like to hear what you've got to say, but if I'm late and my uncle finds out, he'll kill me." "I understand, Mr. Potter," the thin man replied. "Let me just say that if you like what we have to say, and if you agree, then you'll never have to listen to your aunt or uncle again." That pulled Harry up short. "What do you mean?" he asked quickly. "This really isn't the best place to talk," possibly Crutch stated, deliberately looking around at the dozens of high schoolers milling around. "Is there somewhere a bit more private that we could go?" "Well, there's the park just up the road," Harry suggested slowly. "Then, and you're sure that you can get me to work so I won't be late?" "Positive, Harry," Bagman smiled. "All right, then," Harry agreed, before hitching up his bag once more and leading the two men through the crowd and up the street. "This looks perfect," Bagman stated as Harry led them to a small table and chairs to the side of the park. Harry watched, intrigued, as Bagman then pulled out his wand and gave it a couple of discreet but deliberate waves. "Just some privacy charms," the man who could be named Crone explained, seeing Harry's interest. "Muggle repelling, notice me not, and a muffling charm." Shaking his head to clear it, Harry addressed the man. "I'm sorry, but I can't remember your name." "Bartemius Crouch, head of International Magical Cooperation," he said, "and my colleague, Ludo Bagman, head of Magical Games and Sports." Crouch, yes, now that he'd heard it, he remembered it. "You said something about me never having to listen to my aunt and uncle again," Harry prompted, very aware of the time. "Indeed, Mr. Potter," Mr. Crouch replied. "We have an offer for you that would allow you to do exactly that, but I must warn you that it comes with some consequences. Perhaps if we go through it all as thoroughly as we can, and then you can make your decision," Bagman grinned, "although I bet that I can already pick what it'll be." Harry waved a hand, indicating that they should get on with it. "As you will remember from last night, your name came out of the Goblet of Fire, forcing you into a magically binding contract to either compete in the TriWizard tournament or you will lose your magic," Crouch began. I still don't understand that, Harry stated, shaking his head. How did my name get in there anyway? And how can I be locked into this contract without signing something first? To be honest, we're not sure, Bagman grimaced. The head of magical law enforcement, Amelia Bones, has opened an investigation into exactly those questions. As for the binding contract, the best our legal team has been able to come up with is the fact that somehow your magical signature was planted onto the parchment that came out of the goblet, and it is that signature that the goblet has latched on to. Madam Bones will be speaking to you within the next couple of days, Crouch told him, and I'm certain that she'll keep you up to date with her investigation. Harry nodded, not quite understanding, but simply putting it down to some magic hoodoo, and making a mental note to compile a list of questions for this Madam Bones person later. As you also know, your guardians, your aunt and uncle, have stated that you won't be competing in the TriWizard tournament, Crouch continued. That means that when the first task happens on the 24th of this month, you will lose your magic. But we've come up with a way around that, if you agree, that is, Bagman grinned. There's a way not to lose my magic, Harry asked eagerly. Whatever it is, I agree. Bagman and Crouch shared a look before Crouch turned back and held up a single hand. While we hope that you will agree, it is only prudent of us to ensure that you are fully aware of all of the consequences of you agreeing to this line of action, before you, as they say, sign on the dotted line, he stated. What we're proposing is that you become emancipated, Bagman stated. That means that you will become an adult, at least in the magical world, Crouch clarified, with all of the rights, privileges, and penalties that entails. Penalties? Harry asked suspiciously. Bagman waved away Harry's concerns with an errant hand. That's only if you ever run afoul of the law. The main point is that you will get to make all of your own decisions for yourself, where you live, what schooling or jobs you do, not to mention looking after your own finances, and deciding whether or not I compete in this tournament of yours, Harry finished for him. Exactly, Mr. Potter, Crouch nodded. What's the catch? Harry asked after a half-minute of thought and a narrowing of his eyes. The catch, as you put it, Crouch replied, is that being an adult within the wizarding world carries some responsibilities. Most importantly, knowing how to use your magic safely, which includes using your wand and apparition. And to learn those skills, we will need you to go to Hogwarts and learn how to control your magic, Bagman finished. Harry stared at the wizards. It all sounded good, in theory, but there were one or two things that he wanted sorted out before he signed on the dotted line. I was supposed to go to Hogwarts 3 years ago, Harry told them slowly. Being 3 years older than the kids that I'll be learning with doesn't sound like fun. No, I can't imagine that it does, Bagman replied. That's why we've already talked to Headmaster Dumbledore about offering you a specialized, individual, accelerated program until you can catch up with the people your own age. That'll still take a couple of years, Crouch warned, but we imagine that you'll be able to sit your newts with them in 4 years' time, and maybe even your owls in some classes at the end of next year. From the vague memories that Harry had of the books that he'd bought for the last time that he was supposed to go to Hogwarts, he had the impression that normal subjects might not be taught there, and while he had no problems with ditching maths, he'd be little disappointed in leaving behind ancient history, and there was no way that he wanted to drop either art of woodworking. With a small shake of his head, he put those questions aside for the moment. The chance of getting away from Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia for good could be worth it. All right, tell me more about this tournament, Harry asked. Well, the TriWizard tournament is being held at Hogwarts and is being contested by the 3 largest magic schools in Europe: Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the Durmstrang Institute, and Beauxbaton's Academy of Magic, Bagman replied. Each school is represented by 1 champion, and they compete in 3 magical tasks. Wait a minute, Harry said, holding up one hand. If each school already has a champion, and if I'm the 4th champion, where does that leave me? Bagman and Crouch shared a look before Bagman shrugged. Well, once you join Hogwarts, I guess that you'll be Hogwarts' second champion. Harry shook his head emphatically. No, no, no. No way am I going into a brand new school and saying, "Hi, I'm new here and I just happen to also be your second champion." Everyone at the school will resent me. The other schools will kick up a massive stink, and the other three champions, especially the one from Hogwarts, will hate him. Do you have another solution, Mr. Potter? Crouch asked lightly. Harry dropped his head, allowing his bangs to cover his face as he thought. His eyes roamed the tabletop before latching onto the old, faded, fraying badge on the oversized, grey-dyed jumper that he was wearing. Slowly, he brought his head up and looked each of the wizards in the eye, one after the other. I'll represent Stonewall High, he said simply. But Muggle School, Crouch spluttered. They'd never know that you're representing them, Bagman protested. Even if you did well, they'd never hear of it. Besides, once you join Hogwarts, you'd have to drop out of your Muggle school. Harry's eyes hardened. Then I simply won't join Hogwarts until after the tournament. Like I said, there's no way I'm going into the school and trying to throw my weight around. This thing, he said, tapping his forehead where his scar was, will make things bad enough if my memories of that day in the pub with Hagrid is anything to go on. Bagman stared at Harry a long time before he looked at his colleague. It might work. Hopefully we can make Dumbledore agree, Crouch replied. Now you said that there are 3 magical tasks, Harry said, wanting to move the conversation along, conscious of the time. That's right. And the first one's in just over 3 weeks' time, Harry clarified. Yes, Bagman nodded. Then how in the world am I supposed to compete in that? He asked, incredulously. To be honest, Harry, no one expects you to win. Frankly, it'd be impossible, even if you had been at Hogwarts for the past 3 years, Bagman told him. All you really have to do is just put in a showing. Just enough to ensure that the goblet knows that you tried is all you need to do. Okay, I think that I can do that, Harry sighed in relief. So what do you say, Mr. Potter? Do you agree to the emancipation and to then come to Hogwarts and to compete in the TriWizard tournament? Mr. Crouch asked. From the instant that Harry'd heard that there was a way to get out from under his aunt and uncle, he'd known what his answer was going to be. He was sure that he still didn't completely understand everything that it meant, but he understood enough for now. Yes, I agree, he stated firmly. With a nod of his head, Crouch reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a wad of parchment that looked too big to have been able to fit inside it. From a different pocket, he pulled out a short black quill. In that case, you simply need to sign these documents, he explained. There are, I believe, 4 places in which you must sign. This, he said, tapping the quill, is called a blood quill. It is used exclusively for the most official of documents, which includes this one. What it does is that it uses your own blood as ink. You will feel a slight scratching on the back of your hand, but with only 4 signatures, the discomfort will be very slight. Harry eyed the quill warily before hesitantly reaching out and picking it up. Using his other hand, he spun the parchment around and began to read it. It was exactly as the 2 government wizards had described. He noticed that at the bottom of each of the 4 pages, 4 signatures had already been affixed. Gritting his teeth, Harry affixed the end of the quill to the line with his name on it and signed away. As he'd been warned, he felt a slight scratching on the back of his hand. Staring at it, he saw a perfect replica of his signature briefly appear before it faded away. Determining to get it over and done as quickly as possible, Harry flipped to and signed each of the other 3 pages. The instant that he finished signing for the 4th time, the whole document glowed a brilliant gold before 2 identical copies of the parchment appeared, one to either side of the original. Well done, Mr. Potter, Crouch nodded. Now this copy goes to Ministry Records, and with a tap of his wand, the copy to the left promptly disappeared. This set I returned to the minister. The original document was returned to his inside jacket pocket, and this copy is for you." Picking up the last sheaf of parchment, Mr. Crouch handed them to Harry before shaking his hand. Bagman, too, reached across the table and shook his hand as well. "Welcome to adulthood, Harry," Bagman beamed. Chapter 4, Unexpected Present. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Tuesday, 1 November 1994. Park near Stonewall High, Surrey. "Welcome to adulthood, Harry," Bagman beamed, shaking Harry's hand. Glancing at his watch, Harry let loose an exasperated growl. "Sheesh, I'm late for work," he exploded. "You guys said that you could get me there instantly. Well, now's the time to do it." Bartemius Crouch's raised hand froze him as he half stood from the bench seat. "In a moment, Mr. Potter," the wizard said. "Firstly, we'll need to get you to show us where it is on this map." A map materialized from an outside pocket of his jacket, but you may want to take a moment to think about things before you go rushing off. "What things?" Harry snapped. "The fact that you're about to leave Surrey to go to Hogwarts," Crouch replied. "You will need to quit your job." Dropping back into his seat, Harry ran a hand through his hair. "Yeah, you're right. I am going to have to quit, aren't I?" "Not to mention do a spot of shopping," Bagman suggested. "At the very least you'll need school supplies, and if I might suggest it, some new clothes." Harry's eyes dropped to survey the old clothes of Dudley's that his Aunt Petunia had dyed for him before sewing on the badge that adorned his jumper. The man was right. He'd need new clothes. Suddenly, an image of a small gold key, dropping into the bottom of the cavity under his floorboards, blossomed into his mind. "I'm going to need money for that," Harry said slowly before looking up. "I've still got the key to my vault at home." "That'll be a help," Bagman beamed. "As will this." Harry's eyes shifted to the envelope that Crouch had just placed between them. With a quizzical look at the two wizards, Harry picked it up and opened it. Its thickness was explained the instant that he looked inside it. His head snapped up, piercing the wizards in his gaze. "A little something from the Ministry of Magic for the disruption that this is causing in your life," Crouch explained. "How much is in here?" Harry asked sotto voce. 1,000 Muggle pounds, Bagman beamed. "Should be enough for some new clothes, and it matches this." This was apparently a small bag of large gold coins. 200 galleons, Bagman stated, giving the combined answer of how much was in there and what the coins were called before Harry could ask. With more money than Harry had ever seen in his life, if he discounted the mountain of gold inside the vault that his parents had left him, his mind suddenly went blank. "We understand that this is a little overwhelming," Mr. Crouch said gently, "but we really are on a tight schedule. We can give you the rest of today and tomorrow to get your affairs in order. The day after, you must be at Hogwarts." Okay, Harry said slowly, trying to get the thoughts that had gone from nothing to 1,000 miles a second back under control. "How will I be getting around?" "We are available to escort you for the remainder of today, but tonight we'd recommend that you stay at the Leaky Cauldron," Crouch replied. "That way you'll be able to do what you need to do at your own pace in Diagon Alley tomorrow." "The Leaky Cauldron," Harry mused. "That's a pub, isn't it?" "And a boarding house," Bagman confirmed. "Right then, I can think of a few things that we'll need to do here in Surrey before you take me to London," Harry stated, coming to a decision. His head turned to the left as he looked down the road towards his high school. Another glance at his watch decided him on his course of action. "If you can take me Tokatings, that'd be a good place to start," Harry said, reaching for the map. "But we won't be there long, just enough time for me to quit face to face. After that, I'll need to come back here. /0v0 / Tuesday, 1 November 1994. Keating's Wood End Furniture Workshop, Surrey. "You're late," a gruff voice noted the instant that Harry had stepped into the workshop. "I know," Harry replied, looking across the room to note that Sid had already ducked back under the cabinet that he was currently building. Do you know where Terry is? Office, I think, Sid replied without emerging. Thanks, Harry replied. Setting off to the left, and the tiny office half hidden behind bins full of off-cut pieces of timber, Harry noted the dual pair of footsteps following him. Reaching the door, he rapped on the frame. Hey, Terry, you got a minute? He called. Terry looked up from the books spread over the surface of his desk. Throwing his pen down, he gave a weary grin. You betcha, Harry. Anything to get me away from doing up these accounts. Stepping into the room, Harry took in his boss. The man was big, easily as big as Uncle Vernon, but where his uncle was made of fat, Terry was all muscle. Even without trying, the simplest movement of his arms flexed considerable muscles. Numerous white scars littered his arms and hands from his decades of working in the business. If Harry didn't actually know him so well, he would have been terrified of the man, and the dark, bushy beard that covered most of his face only emphasized how dangerous he looked. But that wasn't who Terry was. Harry knew him as a kind man, if a bit rough at times, but that was simply a byproduct of working upwards of 14 hours a day, 7 days a week with men just as rough as he was. It was his eyes that really gave him away. The lines that surrounded his dark brown eyes were made from the full-bodied belly laughs that he seemed to be capable of at a drop of a hat. When Harry'd first been brought to the workshop by his uncle all those years ago, he'd been terrified. He had no idea what to expect, especially after being told that he was an old friend of Uncle Vernon's, but it had never been bad. Terry, along with Sid, Pete, and old Angus, had all taken him under their wings, showing him the ropes of working in a carpentry workshop. He'd started with simply sweeping and moving pieces of wood from one place to another. Before long, though, he was being taught about what it took to work as a carpenter. And the day that Harry'd come in and told them that he'd signed up for woodworking at school, they'd fought to be the ones to teach him everything that they knew. Terry, Sid, and Pete spent the most time with him, showing him the secrets of how to use all of the tools, from the sanders to planes, chisels to bevels, and even the correct way to apply lacquer. Old Angus took a different approach. From him, Harry learnt more of the old ways, how to do things without power tools, and interestingly enough, how to carve, or whittle as the old man called it, small animals out of off-cut pieces of wood. Got some friends with you today, Terry noted, nodding at the two men that had followed Harry into the small office. Ah, yeah, this is Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman, Harry introduced, indicating each man. They're the reason that I'm a bit late, and the reason that I'm going to have to quit. Terry's eyebrows, never easy to see at the best of times under his unruly mop of graying hair, completely disappeared. Quit, you say? Now how can these two gentlemen make you do that? I've been given a scholarship to a private school in Scotland, Harry replied, giving the best reason that he'd been able to come up with in such a short space of time. Terry eyed the men speculatively before turning his gaze onto Harry. Now, don't take this the wrong way, but I wouldn't have thought your grades were good enough for that. Unless it's an art scholarship, Thaddy might be able to believe. The scholarship was set up by young Harry's parents, Mr. Crouch stated. After their death, when Harry went to his aunt and uncle, we lost track of him and have only just managed to find him again. This is something that you want to do. You're not being pressured, Terry asked intently. Harry shook his head. No pressure. I want to go. It's where my parents went to school. Terry reached out and laid a hand on the boy's shoulder after he trailed off. We'll be sorry to lose you. You're a good worker, Harry, Terry stated. At least tell me you'll continue your woodworking classes. I'm afraid that Hogwarts doesn't offer woodworking as a subject, Mr. Crouch stated. Now that's a crying shame, Terry frowned. You'll be letting all of those talents go to waste. A thought seemed to occur to him then, for he leaned back in his chair as he contemplated the men standing in the doorway. Does your school have any space where a workshop could be set up for Harry to work if He had the wood and tools. Crouch and Bagman shared a look before Mr. Crouch carefully answered. While it is possible that space could be arranged, Mr. Potter wouldn't have any access to electricity. No power, huh? Terry seemed to muse before turning back to Harry. When'll you be heading off? I've got to be up at the school the day after tomorrow, seeing how far into term we already are, Harry replied. You'll still be at Vernon's tomorrow, then? Harry shook his head. No, there's a bit that I'll have to do in London tomorrow, so Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman have arranged to take me there tonight. What time do you reckon that you'll head off? Harry did some quick calculations in his head. I want to do a bit of shopping here, not to mention I'll need to collect my school records from Stonewall High and then pick up my stuff from Privet Drive. Maybe 8. Once again, Terry hit the men in his doorway with a piercing look. You'll be taking him up by truck, I presume. Ah, yes, of course, Mr. Bagman declared, although if Harry had to guess, he'd say that the wizard had no idea what a truck actually was. Good, Terry nodded. Well, we'll be sorry to see you go. Harry, make sure you come back for the holidays. We'll always have work here for you. Thanks, Terry, Harry smiled, feeling a lump forming in his throat. Can you tell the others that I said goodbye? And thanks for everything. It was our pleasure, Harry, Terry said. Then, with one heartfelt handshake and a last nod, Harry turned and walked from the workshop, hoping that it wasn't the last time that he was doing so. /0v0 / Tuesday, 1 November 1994. 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. Slipping in the back door, Harry took a careful look around. Good, he sighed. No sign of them. As quickly as he could, he eased the door shut behind him. The small click-off, the latch engaging, was the only sound to be heard, and Harry was sure that it was too soft for anyone else to hear. On tiptoe, he slunk through the kitchen, past his old cupboard, and sidled up to the doorway to the living room. The sound of the blaring television alerted him to the fact that at least one of his relatives was in there. Sliding further along the wall, he eased his head out, just far enough to peek in. Sitting in his usual armchair, one hand wrapped around the glass that was balanced on his enormous stomach, was his uncle, his eyes glued to the quiz show. His aunt, he noticed, was in the matching chair. Neither had noticed that he was there. Softly, he ghosted across the opening, glad that he'd had the foresight to leave his new trainers outside the back door. Feet only covered in socks made so much less noise. From there, he slipped up the stairs towards his room, careful to keep his feet as close to the wall as possible, where the joints were the most secure, and the wood was least likely to creak with his weight. With a sigh of relief, Harry reached his room undetected. Leaving the door open behind him, he systematically began gathering his things. A small pile of books, sketch pads, and other art supplies were gathered from his desk and dumped on his bed. A single look in the cupboard and a shake of his head was all that it took for him to abandon all of Dudley's old cast-offs that had been deemed worthy enough for a freak. But then he knew that he had no need for clothes, not after the last couple of hours. The myriad of shrunken packages in his old school bag now attested to that fact. If he'd still harbored any doubt about the existence of magic, then seeing Mr. Crouch take the dozens of shopping bags from him and tap them with his wand, shrinking them to the size of a matchbook, dispelled them instantly. Those few miniature bags represented what would eventually be his very first wardrobe full of clothes exactly his size, and included everything from new Stonewall High uniforms to pants, shirts, jackets, shoes, and even underwear and pajamas. All it would apparently take is a second tap from Mr. Crouch's wand to return them to regular size, once they were in London later that night. Dropping to the floor, Harry removed the floorboards that hid his secret stash. There he'd kept the half-dozen animals that he'd carved under old Angus' tutelage, as well as the couple of certificates that he'd earned from school, and the most important thing of all, a tiny golden key that he'd been given more than 3 years ago. As quickly as he could, he loaded his school bag with everything that he wanted to take. Then, after slinging it over one shoulder, he started to retrace his steps back towards the backyard, and thence on to a Dursley-free future. The ringing of the doorbell froze Harry as he was about to slip past the living room once more. A groan of frustration escaped him as he heard his uncle rocking his bulk out of the armchair. Seeing no other option open to him, Harry took the couple of steps backwards and answered the door. "Terry," he exclaimed, "what are you doing here?" "Hi, Harry. The boys and I wanted to give you a going-away present," the big man explained. "What, a going-away present? The boys not going anywhere?" Uncle Vernon exclaimed confusedly from behind him. Terry looked at Harry, confusion written all over his face. But Harry said. Harry hurriedly cut in. "Could you just give us 1 minute, Terry?" Ducking hurriedly, Harry quick-stepped past his uncle, and then his aunt, who was now standing in the living room doorway, and entered the kitchen, confident that his relatives were following. "What does he mean you're leaving?" Uncle Vernon hissed. Knowing how close he was to leaving Privet Drive for the last time, a touch of bravado entered Harry's demeanor. "Those 2 wizards came and saw me after school today," Harry began, before being cut off by a growl from his uncle. "They were told that we weren't going to allow you to go." "I know," Harry replied, "but they had another solution, one that I was very pleased to accept." "And what was that, boy?" Uncle Vernon growled. "They emancipated me," Harry simply replied. "That means that I can make my own decisions, and the very first one that I made was that I was never going to live here again." A gasp from his aunt caused Harry to send a curious glance in her direction, but it wasn't enough to stop him. "And the second thing that I decided is that I'm going to go to Hogwarts and learn how to be wizard, just like my parents." Vernon's eyes narrowed. "Fine then. Get out. Good riddance to bad rubbish, I say. Make sure that you never darken our doorstep ever again." "With pleasure, Uncle Vernon," Harry replied, before pushing his way past the man on his way back to the front door. "Oh," he said, pausing to look back, "say goodbye to Dudley for me, won't you?" "Sorry about that," Harry said to Terry as he took some deep breaths to calm himself down. "What was it you were saying?" "I've brought over a going-away present for you from me and the boys," Terry repeated. "A present," Harry blinked. "You didn't have to do that." "Seemed only right," Terry grunted. "Especially after all the hard work you put in over the years and never seeing a penny of your wages, including what you would have earned from the pieces that you created and sold." At Terry's gesture, Harry followed him out the door and around to the side of the house. There he froze at the sight that awaited him. Neatly stacked alongside the wall of the house were piles of timber. Harry easily made out oak, pine, rowan, teak, mahogany, maple, and a handful of others. A quick scan confirmed that there were a dozen or more quality pieces of each type, and that wasn't all. Off to the side was an old wheelbarrow and a couple of large buckets, each filled with offcuts of varying shapes and sizes. It was the final item that really caused Harry's breath to hitch, though. Sitting proudly on the grass was the elegant desk that he'd finished making the day before. "If you look in the bottom left-hand drawer, Angus left you something," Terry stated, indicating the desk. With shaky steps, Harry moved forward and opened the indicated drawer. Inside, he found a drawstring bag filled with odd pieces of different type of wood, all perfect for carving, and laying on top a pair of new knives. "There's also this," Terry said, drawing his attention once more with a kick to an old box that Harry had failed to notice. "There's a bunch of old tools in there that we've been meaning to throw out. Figured that maybe you could use them." "Thanks, Terry. I don't know what to say," Harry choked out. "Nothing to say, really. You earned it all. Just make something beautiful out of it all," Terry replied. "And don't forget, if you ever need a job, there's one waiting for you here." Terry cleared his throat, then glanced around and shuffled his feet. "Better be getting back. The missus will be wondering where I am. You take care, Harry." and with that he was gone into the night. Harry felt a presence come up behind him, and he glanced to either side to see Mr. Bagman and Mr. Crouch to either side of him. "Will I be able to take this with me?" Harry asked doubtfully. "As easy as a tapping my wand to it," Mr. Crouch replied. "Here," Mr. Bagman said, thrusting a piece of paper into his hand. "Tomorrow, when you're in Diagon Alley, you go Torstamford's trunks and give this to Eli Stamford himself. He'll take care of what you need there." A few minutes later, with the desk, wood and other items shrunk and placed into his now bulging school bag, and with his new shoes retrieved, a double gunshot lycra marked Harry Potter leaving Privet Drive for what he hoped was for the very last time. Chapter 5. Diagon Alley, Take 2. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Wednesday, 2 November 1994. The Leaky Cauldron, London. Harry Potter tucked the tiny golden key into an inner pocket of his jacket, picked up the school supply list that he'd been given the night before, and exited room 11 of the Leaky Cauldron. "Good morning, Mr. Potter," the old, stooped innkeeper said merrily as Harry emerged. "Did you enjoy the breakfast?" "Yes, thank you, Tom," Harry replied. "Would you mind opening the archway to Diagon Alley for me?" "It'd be my pleasure, Mr. Potter, my pleasure indeed." Harry waited quietly for Tom to round the bar before following him out into the small, walled courtyard. He focused hard on exactly which bricks Tom tapped. He didn't want to have to keep asking for this to be done for him. As it had once before, so very long ago, the bricks in front of him began to wiggle before pivoting upon themselves and shifting up and back to create a massive arch leading into the most magical place that Harry'd ever seen. Memories blossomed in his mind as he compared what he was seeing now to what his 11-year-old self saw that day when he was accompanied by Hagrid. Shops of all kinds lined each side of the alley, from ones that sold nothing but cauldrons to one that had large barrels of the most bizarre ingredients lining the area around its door. Further down the alley, the sign Offlowerish and Blatz, the bookstore that he remembered, caught his attention. Close at hand, Florian Fortesque's ice cream parlor sat, customers already lined up to buy the first ice creams of the day. At this time of the morning, there weren't many people out and about, but those that were all dressed in wizards' robes of all styles and colors. Some, he saw, even had the traditional wizard's hat perched atop their head. Not wanting to be recognized as the boy who lived, who knew what kind of scene that might turn into, Harry hurried down the street, intent on finding the massive white marble building from his memories. Harry's jaw tightened as he mounted the steps leading to the entrance. This was going to be the first test of that magical document lining his pocket. With a nervous nod at the two armor-clad, halberd-wielding goblins stationed to either side of the door, Harry entered. Inside, he found an incredibly long, high teller area staffed by a half-dozen goblins, these ones wearing tiny, outdated banker's suits. Picking one at random, Harry approached and waited to be noticed. "What do you want?" the goblin finally asked, after what Harry thought was 2 or 3 minutes of being deliberately ignored. "Hi, I would like to speak to someone about my account details, please," Harry nervously told the small being. "Key, please," the goblin intoned. Fishing it out of his pocket, Harry handed it over. After placing a pair on tiny pince-nez glasses on, the goblin examined the key before looking up at Harry and flicking his eyes upwards to take in Harry's scar. The key was handed back. "Follow me," the goblin instructed. Harry waited until the goblin had climbed down from his stool and begun his trek across the floor before he followed. He was led through a door into a rough-hewn stone tunnel. Wooden doors were set along the walls at irregular intervals. At the fourth on the left, the goblin stopped, looked back to check Harry was still there, then promptly rapped on the door and walked back the way that they had come. "Come," a gruff voice announced. Harry slowly opened the door, stepped in and closed it behind him. Looking around, he found himself in a room that any banker would feel comfortable in. A large desk, oak, Harry quickly deduced, running a professional eye over it, dominated the room. Numerous shelves filled with items were dotted on the side walls, while the rear wall was lined from floor to ceiling with filing cabinets. "What do you want?" the goblin seated behind the desk demanded, capturing Harry's attention. Like his counterparts, he, too, was dressed in an outdated banker's suit. Unlike the others, though this one looked much older, at least the tufts of white hairs sticking out of his huge pointed ears seemed to indicate that that was the case. "I'd like to find out about my accounts," Harry told him. With a wave of his hand, the goblin indicated one of the two hard-backed chairs in front of the desk. Harry handed over the small, golden object as he sat down. Just as the first goblin had done, the goblin examined it minutely before placing back in front of Harry. Very deliberately, the goblin raised one hand and gave 3 snaps of his long fingers. Harry watched wide-eyed as a small silver bowl floated across the room before settling on the desk. At the same time, a drawer in a cupboard opened, and a sheaf of parchment did the same. And lastly, one of the hundreds of filing cabinets opened before a file lifted up and settled into the goblin's hands. "I need a drop of your blood, Mr. Potter, to confirm your identity," the goblin told him. "Okay," Harry replied slowly. Leaning forward, Harry stretched out his hand and placed it into the waiting goblin's palm. A silver knife that had been hidden inside the bowl was lifted out before being quickly drawn across the palm of his hand. His hand was then turned and held out over the parchment. After 3 drops had fallen, the goblin waved his hand over the cut, immediately sealing and healing the cut as though it had never been there. Blinking in amazement at the minor piece of magic that had just been performed on him almost made him miss the fact that the parchment filled with writing, all written in a language that Harry could not read. "It seems that you are who you say you are, Mr. Potter," the goblin stated, his features moving in what Harry took to be a smile but could quite easily have been a grimace. "I am Flailclaw. What are your questions?" Nice to meet you, Flailclaw," Harry replied, unsure if it actually was nice to meet someone willing to stick a knife in you before introducing themselves. "We should probably start with this." Harry pulled his emancipation papers out of his pocket and handed them over. Flailclaw's eyes widened as he read it through. After reading it through a second time, he waved his hand over it while chanting in a strange language. The parchment glowing gold seemed to satisfy the goblin. "This is authentic," Flailclaw declared. Then, picking up the still bloody dagger, he traced a pattern on the file with its bloody tip. Harry watched as the file glowed white before flipping open. To his astonishment, there were 2 small ring boxes laying on top of a pile of parchment. "You are entitled to these," Flailclaw stated, pushing the boxes towards him. "What are they?" Harry asked. "Your head of house rings," Flailclaw stated as though that should be obvious. "Head of house? What does that mean?" Harry asked. "In simple terms, it means that you are the head of the ancient and noble House of Potter and the head of the ancient House of Peveril. You are responsible for all family matters for those 2 families," Flailclaw replied. "What, you mean I'm some kind of lord or something?" Harry asked incredulously. The look that Flailclaw gave him told Harry that his thoughts weren't worth the goblin's time. Thankfully, he decided to answer anyway. "No, there are no lords in the wizarding world. Occasionally, a member of the Wisengamot may be called such as a mark of respect. Those trinkets are merely a status symbol at best. And before you ask, an ancient family is simply a wizarding family that can trace its magical ancestors back a minimum of 15 generations." "Oh, okay," Harry replied. He opened the 2 rings to find that they were very similar. Each was made of the finest platinum with a family crest, bordered by the name of the respective family engraved upon it. Picking up the Potter ring, he examined it closely to find the image of a pot upon a shield, a tiny dark orange gemstone set in its center. The image on the peveril ring was of a triangle bisected by a line with a circle set in the middle. In the center of the circle, a tiny emerald sparkled up at him. "These are your vault statements," Flailclaw stated, laying 3 pieces of parchment in front of him as he placed the Pater ring on the smallest finger of his right hand and the peveril ring on the corresponding finger of his left hand. "As you can see, you are more than moderately wealthy. This is your trust fund. It was designed for your schooling use until you came of age. This is your main Pater vault. I understand that there are a large number of items contained within it in addition to the gold, silver, and bronze. The Peveril Vault, as you can see, is the smallest of the 3. Now, as to your other assets," Flailclaw continued, setting the 3 pieces of parchment to the side and replacing them with a further 2. "The Pater fortune has fallen far over the years. This is mainly due to the fact that most of the businesses that your family was invested in during the last Wizarding War were either destroyed or bankrupted. You are left with only these few." Harry ran his eye down the small list. A 15% stake in Zonko's Joke Shop, a 20% stake in Obscurus Books, a 10% stake in Tarika Apothecarian somewhere called Nocturne Alley, and a 35% stake in Davonhurst's Wizarding Camping Supplies. Apart from this Muggle apartment containing 8 flats, your property interests are strictly in land, Flailclaw stated, directing his gaze to the second piece of parchment. "This is the largest, Rowan Hill. It consists of 220 acres of land on the Welsh coast. At one time, your family manor stood on his ground, but it was completely destroyed at the same time that your grandparents were killed and never rebuilt. You also own a large parcel of land on the outskirts of Hogsmeade and a smaller piece of land near Windermere, Cumbria. There is also the property that your parents owned in Godric's Hollow, but that has been appropriated by the Ministry of Magic and turned into magical monument." Slowly, Harry nodded his head, trying to take in all of the information that he was being bombarded with. Those 2 pieces of parchment were placed on top of the others, followed by his emancipation papers. 2 small keys were then pushed across the desk towards him. "The keys to your vaults," Flailclaw stated. "If that is all, good," he replied when Harry didn't respond in the fraction of a second that he was given. "In that case, Gringotts thanks you for your business. Good day." Automatically, Harry picked up the parchment and keys, thanked the goblin, and exited back the way that he'd come. /0v0 /. Harry glanced back up at the enormous marble building behind him. The one thing that he could say for sure about his visit to the bank was that it had been quick. Those goblins really didn't muck about. The second thing that he knew for sure was that he was going to have to come back later with a bag of some kind. While he'd already withdrawn the money that he thought that he was going to need, finding what looked like the contents of half a house stored in the largest of the vault had been completely unexpected. Depending on how much time he had after he'd completed his shopping, he knew that he'd be spending time poking around in there, and not just to collect some of the pictures, books, and journals that he'd already noticed. Digging out the list of supplies that he'd been given to get, Harry considered where to go next. Most of it, he considered, should be fairly straightforward. But there was an awful lot of it, and he really didn't feel like having to make multiple trips back and forth between Diagon Alley and the Leaky Cauldron. Decision made, Harry set off to find that trunk shop that Ludo Bagman had told him about. 2 minutes, walking down the alley, and he found what he was looking for. A dozen trunks piled haphazardly outside the doors was a dead giveaway. The glance at the shop's name was more out of habit than anything else. Harry stepped cautiously through the door and looked around. He found himself in a room considerably darker than he thought that it should have been. That, he decided, was most likely due to the hundreds of stacks of trunks clogging up the room, leaving tiny aisles through which to wend his way. He paused as he found himself in an open area, trunks piled over 2 sides, racks of miniature furniture on another, and the final side filled with ordinary-looking bags. "May I help you?" a tiny man asked, appearing from out of the gloom. "I'm looking for Eli Stanford," Harry replied. "Well, you found him," the man smiled, although it was nearly lost under the busy mustache that he sported. "I was told to give you this," Harry said, handing over the note that Bagman had given him the night before. "An unusual request," Mr. Stanford mused, before lifting his wand and moving it in a complicated pattern. Harry peered around, trying to discern what the man had just done. Seconds later, his curiosity was answered as a trunk zoomed out from one of the many aisles and settled neatly on the floor in the middle of the cleared space. It was beautifully crafted from a rich ebony wood. Its corners were reinforced with silver, the same material that was used for its clasp. "This is what I believe that you are looking for," Mr. Stanford stated. "One of our three-compartment trunks." "Three compartments?" Harry asked. "Certainly, certainly. Here, let me show you," Mr. Stanford said, kneeling down in front of the trunk and gesturing for Harry to join him. "These are the runes to tap to get the compartment that you wish for," Mr. Stanford stated, pointing at the strange markings just under the clasp. "The first compartment." Mr. Stanford touched the first marking and opened the lip, revealing the inside. Harry's eyes narrowed. He'd swear that the insides were slightly bigger than what the outside would suggest. The lid was promptly closed. "The second compartment," Mr. Stanford said, touching the second marking and opening it. This one was identical to the first, slightly larger than it should be. That was until he noticed the series of 5 markings that were etched on the lip of the trunk. "This compartment comes with 4 drawers," Mr. Stanford explained. "Simply touch the rune to indicate which drawer that you want." Harry goggled at what happened next. Mr. Stanford touched the first marking, and the bottom of the trunk dropped away, as though it was falling down a well. A touch of the second marking caused a drawer to appear in the rear wall that promptly opened, filling the space that had been left behind. A touch of each marking revealed that there were drawers hidden in each of the 4 walls. All Harry could do was shake his head and remind himself that he was dealing with magic, not logic. "And finally, the third compartment," Mr. Stanford declared, after lowering the lid and touching the final marking under the clasp. This time, when the lid was opened, the inside of the trunk consisted of a set of stairs disappearing downwards. At Mr. Stanford's smile and gesture, Harry warily stepped forward and into the trunk. The instant that he reached the bottom of the stairs and looked around, he knew exactly why Mr. Bagman had sent him here for this. The room that he was now staring around in was easily 10 feet by 7 feet big. Even though it was completely empty, Harry could easily see how it could be turned into a workshop. "I love magic," Harry grinned. "Yes, it is quite useful, isn't it?" Mr. Stanford chuckled, having followed him down. "What do you think?" "I'll take it," Harry declared. "If you're interested in furniture, we have some right upstairs," Mr. Stanford said, continuing his sales pitch. "Do you have any open-ended shelving and work benches?" Harry asked eagerly. Of course, Mr. Stanford assured him. "Shall we?" /0v0 /. Harry blinked as the sunlight hit him after emerging back into Diagon Alley. He'd ended up spending a lot more money than he'd intended in the trunk shop, but to have a place where he could work on both his carpentry and art was worth it in his opinion. The fact that the trunk could shrink to fit into his pocket was simply a bonus, as was the new book bag and pack that he'd picked out to hold his art supplies. Speaking of which, directly across from where he was currently standing was the most eye-catching store that Harry had ever seen, at least in his opinion. Its enormous glass windows displayed frames and paintings of all sizes and styles. What made these ones so amazing to Harry, though, was the fact that the paintings were moving. Almost on their own, his feet took him across the alley and in through the door. Inside, he found even more of the wondrous moving pictures mounted on the walls. There were animals in forest settings grazing and walking around, groups of people conversing, and even a field of sunflowers swaying in the breeze. How can they move? Harry breathed. A very special technique, which includes potions and spells, he was answered, the unexpected voice making him jump. Harry's head snapped to the side to find a woman standing beside him. Her long brown hair trailed down over one shoulder, drawing his eye to the art smock that she was wearing, the paint dapped on it indicating that she was an artist, not just a storekeeper. I'd love to be able to get my paintings to move like that, Harry stated wistfully. Are you an artist too, my dear? The woman asked, her eyes shining brightly. Harry nodded. Yeah, my teacher says that I have talent. I just think that I've still got a lot to learn. Well, let's see what we can do for you, she smiled. When Harry finally left the art store some time later, his new trunk was filled with art supplies, bottles of special potion, and 3 books explaining about wizarding art. Deciding that he'd better start concentrating on finding what he needed for school before he found that he'd wasted the entire day sidetracked by everything that caught his eye in this amazing alley, Harry took out the book list once more and read it through. The very first item, he decided, was where he needed to begin. Thankfully, he already knew where to go for that. The small shop with the single wand lying on a purple cushion in the window was exactly as he remembered it. Pushing open the door, Harry walked in, making a tiny bell tinkle high above him. Harry Potter, Harley and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, a voice stated from out of the shadows before Ollivander, the odd man who'd sold Harry his first wand, emerged. Ah, hello, sir, Harry greeted. And how is your wand, Mr. Potter? I can't imagine that it has seen much use since you were last in this shop, Ollivander stated. That's why I'm here, Harry replied. I need a new wand. Ollivander's eyes narrowed. What happened to the last one? Gulping, Harry decided to tell the truth. When my uncle decided that I wasn't going to go to Hogwarts, he burnt all of my things, including my wand. How very unfortunate, Ollivander declared. I gather that you are here for a new wand then. Yes, I am, Harry replied. In that case, let us see what we can find, Ollivander stated before turning to the rows of boxes behind him. Mr. Ollivander, sir, are we going to have as much trouble as the last time? Harry asked, remembering that it took nearly half an hour before he found his holly wand. I suspect we are, Ollivander replied. You were a tricky customer then, and I dare say that you'll be a tricky customer now. Is there no way to speed up the process? Harry asked hopefully. Ollivander turned back and regarded him with his strange blue eyes. There is one way, Ollivander mused, but instead of shortening the process, it would be lengthened. However, your presence within the store would be less. Yes, Harry asked, not sure what to make of that seeming contradiction. I am proposing a custom-made wand, Mr. Potter, Ollivander declared. Custom-made, sounds good to me, Harry smiled. Once again, Ollivander stared at him for an overly long time, before simply nodding and lifting up a section of the countertop. If you'll come with me through to my workshop, he offered. Harry felt the tension fall away in waves as he entered the back room. It was all so eminently familiar. There was a large workbench, tools hanging in their places above it. Racks of different types of wood sat the side waiting for use. Only the table of jars seemed a little off. That was until Harry equated them with the nails and screws that he was used to seeing. I believe that we can forego the measurements, Ollivander began, taking a seat on the stool. I already know those from your last visit. Harry gave a small nod, his mind replaying the time the weird tape measure flittered about his body, measuring everything from the length of his arm to the distance between his nostrils. Instead, we'll begin with the wood. Simply run your hand over the wood and bring me the piece that feels most comfortable to you. It may even feel slightly warm or perhaps welcoming, Ollivander explained. Doing as instructed, Harry started at one end of the racks, lightly touching each piece of wood that was there. As he did so, he couldn't help but catalogue the type of wood that they were: oak, beech, ash, mahogany, elder, hawthorn. It wasn't until he reached the willow section that he found one that felt different. As he leant in closer, closing his eyes to more fully concentrate on what he was feeling, he allowed his other hand to reach out to steady himself. A jolt of warmth spreading from his left hand had joined the feeling of completeness that he'd been experiencing from the piece of willow. Snapping his eyes open, Harry looked to see what had caused the warmth. It was a piece of rowan that his hand had come to rest upon. Harry shook his head. That particular type of wood seemed to be cropping up a lot. Firstly in the desk that he'd made, then it had been mentioned as part of the name of the land he owned in Wales, and now this. "Ah, I seem to have found two," Harry told the old wand maker. "Well, bring them here then," Ollivander instructed. "And that nice complementary pair," Ollivander mused, running his long fingers over first one and then the other. "Rowan, good for protection, and willow, particularly good for charms and healing. Incidentally, willow was the wood used in your mother's wand." "It was?" Harry asked, startled at learning something unexpected about his mum. "Indeed. Now on to the wand core," Ollivander stated. "Inside each jar is a different core. Simply pass your hand over the top of each jar and feel for the one that calls you." After looking in some of the jars, Harry was certain that he didn't want to actually know what some of them were. Thankfully, the one that he felt pulled to contained some type of hair. "The hair of a sphinx," Ollivander told him. "Especially useful in intelligence and creativity. This will indeed be a most unusual wand, Mr. Potter. It is rare indeed that I use sphinx hair, and never have I used this combination of components." Harry nodded uncertainly, unsure what to make of that. "Well, off you go then," Ollivander instructed, waving his hands at him. "I have work to do. Return in 4 hours." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," Harry replied before quickly making his escape. /0v0 /. The following 2 hours was spent with Harry traipsing up and down the alley, ducking into first one store and then another, buying everything that was on the supply list that he'd been given. Well, everything plus 1 or 2 extras, like the broom, for example. He hadn't intended on buying one, but after indulging his curiosity by walking into quality Quidditch supplies and then allowing himself to be talked into trying out a broom in the back demonstration room, he simply couldn't buy a broom. The salesman assured him that the Nimbus 2000 was the perfect broom for him. Not too fast, but with more than enough kick to give him a thrilling ride. Madame Malkin's had been a battle with frustration. Once Madame Malkin had realized who he was, she kept trying to insist that he buy a full set of Hogwarts robes. It took agreeing to buy some standard wizarding clothes, in addition to the 4 forest green over-robes that he'd chosen as acceptable accompaniments to his Stonewall High uniform, before she finally settled down and allowed him to leave. His perusal of the dozens and dozens of different types of quills and stacks and parchment with inscribulous writing instruments decided Harry that he needed a trip back out into the normal world before the day was over. Fortunately, he'd already been considering it anyway. Now, though, he'd be adding buying fountain pens and lecture pads to his idea of getting new glasses. Noting the time, Harry stopped for a late lunch. He figured that if he hurried, he'd still have enough time to do everything, including picking up his new wand and having a second stop at Gringotts before all the stores closed for the day. That just leave him with packing everything properly into his trunk that night once he got back to the leaky cauldron. And he really wanted to make sure that he got to bed early that night. Going to Hogwarts for the first time tomorrow was going to ensure that it was a momentous and most assuredly a tiring day. Chapter 6. Welcome to Hogwarts. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 /. Thursday, 3 November 1994. The Headmaster's Office, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "You're certain that he's coming today, Albus?" Minerva McGonagall, deputy head and transfiguration professor of Hogwarts, asked. Albus Dumbledore's eyes twinkled over his half-moon spectacles as he was peering at the woman who was currently paused in her continual pacing. "He will be here, Minerva," he replied soothingly. "Barty contacted me this morning to confirm their arrival." Dumbledore lifted one hand to forestall her next question. "They are only 10 minutes late, after all." Minerva pursed her lips before dropping into one of the seats that the headmaster had conjured upon her arrival. Beside her, the 4 students that she'd brought with her appeared uncomfortable, most likely due to her constant pacing and worry. She was just about to apologize to them, although whether that was for her pacing or for them being kept waiting, she had no idea when the fireplace burst into life. Her head snapped to the side just as the flames turned green. She was just rising to her feet when the first of their visitors arrived. Bartemius Crouch stepped from the fireplace, brushed the soot from his robes, nodded to those in the headmaster's office, and turning back to await the other person expected through the flue. He was barely in time to catch the teen who came stumbling awkwardly out of the fireplace. It was only a fortuitous hand that stopped the staggering Harry Potter, ending up on his face on the floor. "Good morning, Barty, Mr. Potter. Welcome to Hogwarts," Dumbledore said exuberantly as he rose to his feet, waving his wand to banish the soot from the two as he did so. "Headmaster Dumbledore," Barty nodded. "Professor McGonagall, may I present Mr. Harry Potter?" Minerva took the opportunity to get her first good look at the teen before her. What she saw made her gasp. It was as though she was looking straight into the past. "You look extraordinarily like your father, Mr. Potter," she blurted. "Except for your eyes, they are purely all lily." "Thank you, ma'am," Harry blinked back. Minerva returned his blink with one of her own. She had been expecting Harry to be wearing traditional black Hogwarts robes. Instead, his outer robe was a deep forest green, while underneath it, his clothes appeared very Muggle. His pants and jacket were a dull stone grey, matching his tie, although, looking closer, she noted a pattern of pale green stripes running diagonally down it. Completing his wardrobe was a crisp white shirt. "Mr. Potter," Barty continued with the introductions, "may I present Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." "It's an honor to meet you, Harry," Dumbledore replied. After stepped forward to shake the headmaster's hand, Bartemius turned Harry's attention to her. "And this is Minerva McGonagall, Hogwarts deputy head, head of Gryffindor House, and professor of Transfiguration." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Potter," she replied. "Ma'am," Harry nodded. Noticing his eyes flit to the 4 teens behind her, Minerva turned to conduct the introductions. "May I present 4 of your future classmates," she said, before indicating each one as she said their names. "This is Susan Bones, Daphne Greengrass, Hermione Granger, and Neville Longbottom." "Hi," Harry said shyly. "Before we go any further, I think that it would be appropriate to get young Harry sorted," Dumbledore interjected. Automatically, Minerva found herself reciting her usual house speech that she gave to all of the first years before their sorting. "Your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts," she began before being interrupted by the teen. "I'm not being sorted," Harry stated flatly. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Potter," Minerva spluttered, "but everyone who attends Hogwarts gets sorted into one of the 4 houses." Harry was shaking his head at her. "That may be, ma'am, but I'm not going to be a Hogwarts student, at least not yet, and therefore I won't need to be sorted." Minerva turned bewildered eyes onto Dumbledore. "Ah, yes, I believe Barty did mention something to that effect," Dumbledore stated offhandedly. "But now that you are here, I believe that you will come to understand the importance of being sorted into a Hogwarts house." Once again, Harry shook his head. "I've already explained this to Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman." "Enlighten us as to your reasoning, Mr. Potter," Dumbledore said, waving a hand towards one of the empty seats, an invitation that Harry ignored. Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman explained to me that Hogwarts already has a champion for this tournament thing that I've been somehow entered into, Harry began. And there is absolutely no way that I want to come into a school and become Asukan champion. Can you imagine how well that go over with the students already here? Minerva found herself nodding in agreement. The boy would be ostracized at the very least, bullied certainly, and she didn't dare think what the Slytherins' response would be. No, it'd be best for me to remain neutral, Harry continued. And that means not becoming a Hogwarts student or being sorted. And just so that it's said, the same goes for the other two schools that already have champions. So you're going to declare yourself independent of any school? Minerva asked. This time Harry simply smiled at her. Not in the slightest. Since it would be best if I represented a school, I'm going to represent Stonewall High, my old high school. A Muggle school? Minerva gasped over the top of the barely repressed chuckle coming from one of the four behind her. Exactly, Harry nodded before turning to Dumbledore. That's not to say that I won't be incredibly grateful for the magical training that you've already lined up for me, and once the tournament is finally done with, I'll be more than happy to officially become a Hogwarts student. While your reasoning is sound, Harry, I had hoped that you might reconsider, Dumbledore temporized. Sorry, not going to happen, Harry replied, sounding anything but sorry. This is the way that it has to be. The Ministry is in full agreement with Mr. Potter's reasoning and solution, Barty stated. Minerva watched Dumbledore, waiting for the final decision. Finally, after gazing at young Harry for nearly a full minute, the headmaster sighed. Well, he said, if that is the way that it has to be, then I guess that that is the way that it has to be. Of course, if you change your mind. Dumbledore let his sentence hang there expectantly, but Minerva could already tell that Harry was not going to be changing his mind. She guessed that she'd have to save the rest of her speech until the following September. I will have the elves prepare one of the guest quarters for you, Dumbledore stated. Perhaps one near the center of the castle to fit in best with your independent studies. Taking that as her cue, Minerva pulled a piece of parchment from her pocket and approached Harry. Due to your age, we have arranged for an independent study course for you that encompasses both individual time with the professors of each subject, as well as peer tutors, Minerva began, indicating the four behind her as she did so. Mr. Crouch mentioned something like that, Harry nodded. Of course, you do have the option of joining any of the third-year groups if you so wish for the electives that you choose to take, she continued. You would still be 1 year older, but that difference should be negligible. Harry appeared to think that through before slowly answering. That might be something that I'll take you up some time, but not just yet, I think. Those classes have already been going for, 2 months now? At a nod, he continued. That put me well behind them and wouldn't be fair to either the students, the teacher, or me. If I can catch up to them, perhaps we could revisit the idea then. Minerva nodded. That would be acceptable. Now all we need to know are exactly which subjects that you wish to take. Obviously, astronomy, charms, defense against the dark arts, herbology, history of magic, potions, and transfiguration are all compulsory subjects. That just leaves your electives. There are 5 for you to choose from, of which you must choose a minimum of 2. Care of magical creatures, ancient runes, Muggle studies, arithmancy, and divination, Harry supplied for her, making a face of disgust at the last one. Mr. Crouch mentioned them this morning. The books for all of them were on the list that I was given, and I bought the lot, not realizing that I only had to choose a couple. So have you made your decision? Minerva asked hopefully. Harry shook his head. Not yet. To be honest, I'm still not sure what some of them even are. We have excused your peer tutors from classes for the day, Dumbledore interjected. Perhaps you could find out some more from them this morning while they are showing you around the castle, and then you could give your final class selections to Professor McGonagall at lunch. Thank you, Harry replied. I'll do that. I will escort you to your quarters after lunch, Mr. Potter, Minerva stated. Very good, Dumbledore twinkled. Now, how about you four take our new student, oh, forgive me, our new resident, on a tour of the castle? Certainly, Professor, Miss Granger beamed. Shall we? /0v0 /. Harry stopped as he and the four others reached the old, stone corridor. The door that they'd just left was guarded by a pair of the ugliest gargoyles that he'd ever seen. Lifting an eyebrow, he pierced one of this new tutors with a question. They guard the headmaster's office. If you want to get in, you have to tell them the password. If you don't know it, then they'll relay a message to the headmaster, the girl with incredibly bushy hair told him. Ignoring the illogic of what he'd just been told, Harry focused on the girl instead. Her robes and the piping of her tie were all trimmed in blue. A large crest filled with an eagle adorned the right side of her robes. She was easily the most eager of the four, and he was willing to bet that she would be filling his head with more facts than he'd be able to keep straight as soon as the tour started. Hermione right? Harry asked. She nodded eagerly. Like from the Winter's Tale be Shakespeare, Harry clarified. This time she beamed at him. Not many people know that. My parents and me grandparents are all Shakespeare buffs. After acknowledging that with a nod, Harry turned to the only other guy in the group. He was slightly taller than Harry, with slightly chubby cheeks to go along with his rather unfit frame. His robes and tie were trimmed in red, a lion sitting in pride of place where Hermione's eagle was. Neville, Harry confirmed, eliciting a shy nod. Continuing his turn, Harry took in the next girl. This one wore robes and a tie trimmed in yellow with an animal that Harry thought might be a badger on it. She had long mahogany-colored hair pulled back in a ponytail, allowing her happy expression and dancing brown eyes to shine clearly. A large smile was already on her face as she waited to see if he remembered her name. That's right, Harry, she replied. It's nice to meet you, and before I forget, I just wanted to say thank you so much for what you're doing. I mean, deciding not to get sorted until after the tournament. Cedric Diggory, he's the Hogwarts champion and a Hufflepuff, like me and us. Puffs don't seem to get much glory, so it's really an amazing thing that the Hogwarts champion is a Puff. And if you'd become the second Hogwarts champion, it would have taken so much away from Cedric, and he really does deserve all the kudos that he's given. You're welcome, Harry replied, trying not to stare at the verbal barrage that he was just subjected to. And you're Daphne, Harry said, turning to the last girl. She stood slightly apart from the other three, and while Harry could tell that she was listening intently, her body was turned away as though she was disinterested. Her aloof look, coupled with her long, sleek black hair, slim build, and from what he could remember from in the office, the most brilliant blue eyes that he'd ever seen. Correct, Mr. Potter, she replied, finally deigning to turn her head towards him, letting him see those piercing blue eyes once more. Harry, he corrected. With a small bow of her head, she conceded to his wishes. Harry, she repeated. And the four of you are going to be my tutors, he asked. Yes, Hermione replied. We're all top of our year in different subjects, and also from different houses, so Professor McGonagall asked us if we wouldn't mind giving up some of our free time to get you up to speed, as it were. Shall we walk while we talk? Susan suggested, indicating to their left. That way Harry can see the castle before lunch. Harry fell into step between Susan and Hermione, with Neville and Daphne flanking each of the girls. As they talked, Harry allowed his eyes to rove along the corridor. The suits of armor weren't exactly unexpected, this being a castle after all. The fact that one of suits gave them a jaunty salute as they passed was quite surprising, causing Harry to shy and stumble away from it. Don't mind them, Hermione frowned. I think the Weasley twins charmed them last week, and the professors still haven't managed to find and reverse all of the suits of armor yet. They're right good at pranks, Neville blurted, and right easy to spot. Tall, red hair and have this annoying habit of finishing each other's sentences. It's like watching a tennis match whenever you're in a conversation with them, Hermione groused. Okay, Harry said slowly, as his eyes slid from the nearest suit of armor and onto a gigantic painting filled with a dozen witches and wizards playing some sort of card game. The fact that they all stopped and waved as the five of them passed wasn't quite as shocking as it could have been after the art store in Diagon Alley that he'd been in the day before. Perhaps you should tell me more about those electives, Harry suggested. Of course, Hermione piped up happily. Well, the elective that I'd be helping you with if you choose it is Muggle Studies. Personally, as you've grown up with Muggles, I'd recommend that Yowden take it. The course is taught by a witch, who I don't think has been any closer than 100 miles from a Muggle in a decade. The course book is easily 100 years out of date, too, which doesn't help. And that's supposed to teach witches and wizards about the normal world, Harry asked incredulously. I know, Hermione replied, giving him a look of mutual disgust. What I'm doing is studying the text in my spare time so that I can take the owl without attending any of the classes. Well, I think that it's safe to say that is one that I won't be choosing, Harry stated. Have you ever had the feeling that you could predict the future? Neville stuttered. I'm guessing that you're talking about divination, Harry asked. At Neville's relieved nod, Harry continued. Nope, never had a feeling like that. And to be honest, I'd already decided not to do that one. Mind you, I did consider it for all of about 2 seconds. But then I realized that I was thinking about it simply with the excuse to freak my aunt out, about learning about the horoscopes that she's always turning her nose up at. Good decision there, Harry, Hermione replied. Most people take it for an easy owl. It doesn't take much thought, and unless you've already got the gift, I don't think that it'd do anything for you. Harry nodded before turning to Susan. So, what's the elective that you tutor me in? Care of magical creatures, Susan beamed. It's just what it sounds like, learning all about magical creatures, what they eat, how to identify them, where they live, and how to care for them. It's great fun. What sorts of creatures are there? Harry asked. Let's see, Susan began to list creatures, counting them out on her fingers. Unicorns, but of course you wouldn't be able to touch them, being a boy and all. Boat-truckles, nifflers, bicorns, flabberworms, fire crabs, salamanders. Harry reached out and grabbed her hands before she could name any others. I didn't understand half of the words that you just said. Could be interesting, though. Oh, it truly is, Harry, Susan beamed. I'm guessing you'd be in charge of teaching me either ancient runes or arithmancy, Daphne, Harry asked. Both, actually, Daphne replied. And what are they exactly? They were the two that were least self-explanatory. Arithmancy is basically studying the mathematics of spells and enchanted objects, Daphne replied. It is used in spell creation and careers like warding, enchanting, and even in potion making. Harry screwed up his nose. Never really liked maths all that much. That's not to say that I'm no good at it, because I am. I was always in near the top of my maths classes at Stonewall. And while I have no idea what those jobs were that you just listed, they make arithmancy sound rather important. It is, Daphne stated flatly. As for ancient runes, that subject covers the different ways that magic users have created and used symbols to control magic. Today, runes are used primarily in creating wards or in enchanting. That is, creating a rune combination that produces the same sort of effect that a magic user can get from their wand, but without the witch or wizard needing to use their wand all of the time. Like with choosing which compartment they want from their trunk if it has multiple compartments, Harry mused. Daphne's blue eyes bored into him, bringing him back to the here and now before she gave a small nod of approval. Exactly. As they had been talking, the five of them had wandered the castle, with different passageways, and where they led being explained to Harry. Now, though, they came to the main thoroughfare of the castle. The stairs move, Harry asked incredulously. Of course, Daphne replied simply. It does take a bit of getting used to, Susan added. And you never know when they're going to do so, Neville noted, with what Harry saw was a decided shiver. And unfortunately, there's no rhyme or reason to the movements either, Hermione frowned. It seems that it all depends on how that stairs are feeling at that moment. Harry stared at the brown-haired girl. The stairs had feelings. All he could do was shake his head and remind himself that he'd come to Amager Castle. Ah, here we are, Susan said happily, drawing his attention to the fact that a set of stairs had just lined up with where they were standing. Shall we head outside? With a shrug, Harry followed along. They arrived in a large entrance hall that Harry was sure could fit the entire Dursley house inside it, and both levels at that. To one side, 4 enormous glass cases stood tall, each one filled with different colored gems. They count the house points, Neville told him, seeing where he was looking. Not something that you'll have to worry about. What about the teachers? Harry asked as they headed towards the massive double doors. What are they like? Well, you've already met Professor McGonagall, Hermione replied. She teaches transfiguration. She's incredibly strict but indisputably fair. The rest are all right, if you don't count Trelawney, and since you're not taking divination, you don't have to worry about her, Susan commented. They all have their own eccentricities, though, but it doesn't take much to get used to them. Except for Snape, Neville muttered. Daphne's head snapped towards him, and she pierced him with a cool, hard gaze. That's Professor Snape. Oh, come on, Daphne. Even you have to admit that the man's biased, Susan cajoled. Reluctantly, Daphne gave a single nod. Still, he is my head of house and a master of potions. Harry'd had biased teachers before. He remembered a couple of years ago when the English teacher that he had seemed to dote on a particular group of girls and ignored the rest of the class. Besides, not being a Hogwarts student or in a classroom full of others, then he couldn't see how this Professor Snape's bias could affect him. Perhaps you better tell me about these houses, Harry suggested, deliberately changing the topic. I'm guessing the different colors and animals that you're wearing have something to do with it. Yes, Hermione replied. Hogwarts was founded over 1,000 years ago by the greatest witches and wizards of the age, Rowena Ravenclaw, Helga Hufflepuff, Godric Gryffindor, and Salazar Slytherin. The 4 houses were named in their honor, and each house epitomizes the traits that that particular house prizes above all others. I wear the blue and eagle of Ravenclaw, the house known for intelligence, knowledge, and wit, she finished. I'm from Gryffindor, the house of the daring, brave, and chivalrous, Neville explained. We're represented by the lion. As I said before, Harry, I'm from Hufflepuff, Susan reminded him. Hufflepuff House values hard work, loyalty, and fair play. Slytherin House prizes ambition, cunning, and resourcefulness, Daphne related. We wear the snake as it is well known that Slytherin himself could talk to snakes. Oh, I can do that, Harry exclaimed. You, Harry Potter, the boy who lives speaks Parseltongue, Daphne asked incredulously. If that means talks to snakes, then yeah, Harry replied. I've always been able to do it. Accidentally set a boa constrictor on my cousin once at the zoo when he surprised us having a conversation. Not a good day, he finished with a head shake. I don't imagine that it would have been, Daphne replied, but the gleam in her eye had changed to something calculating. Best not to go telling too many others about that, Harry, Neville told him seriously. Why? Harry asked, suddenly feeling nervous with the way that everyone was looking at him. Let's just say that being able to speak Parseltongue isn't a good thing, Hermione replied. It's a trait that is exclusively associated with dark wizards here in Britain. What but why? Harry asked. He never received an answer, though, as a sudden rush of air preceded a flash of white and an unexpected weight on his right shoulder. Swiveling his head, Harry found a snowy white owl perched there, her golden eyes staring right back at him.